Gareth Jenkins is one of, if not the most successful Welsh club coach of the professional era. He won many cups and titles for his beloved Llanelli, and then moved on to the Scarlets and won titles with them too. And he was an innovator during the period when rugby was still working out the best way to produce a winning professional outfit. But even with all that success, the man will unfortunately be remembered for the embarrassment of the 2007 World Cup, and consequently being sacked shortly after in a French car park. As Roger Lewis and his cronies brutally delivered the news, Gareth was probably thinking two things. How did it all go so wrong so quickly? And why the hell do they make us wear these disgusting beige suits?
So why didn't it work for Jenkins and his coaching staff? Well, let's go back to the start and try and figure out what went wrong.
Well, Gareth's name had been within the mix for the Welsh coach as far back as Graham Henry leaving, and then given the success that he carried on having at club level, once Steve Hansen announced that he would be leaving and going back to New Zealand too, it seemed like Jenkins was always going to be one of the favourites, but of course they opted for Mike Ruddock. The choice to go with Ruddock is an interesting decision in its own right. At the time he was coaching the Dragons and Jenkins was coaching the Scarlets. At the initial application process, 15 coaches put their name forward for the Wales job, Gareth Jenkins being one of them, and in fact the only one of the regional coaches to do so. He then made the second round of interviews along with one other, that being Harlequins coach Mark Evans, and by that point it seemed like for sure he was going to be named as the next Welsh coach. Then, like many other decisions by the Welsh Rugby Union over its history, out of nowhere they did a Kansas City shuffle, and while everyone was looking left, they went right and named Mike Ruddock as the new Wales head coach, leaving everyone shocked and a little bit confused. There wasn't an awful lot of clarity from the union as to why they did this, but Jenkins was of course angry and really embarrassed. He said the whole thing had humiliated him, and he questioned the integrity of the selection committee.
Strangely, the union's decision was vindicated quite quickly because Ruddock went straight on to win the Six Nations, and that must have just been like extra salt in the wound to see Wales get success straight away when Gareth Jenkins probably thinks that he should have been in charge at the time.
Luckily for Jenkins, now he was available, he was actually given a really excellent opportunity to go on the coaching staff for the 2005 Lions tour. He was basically Woodward's second in command and took charge of most of the midweek games, which is a huge honour and a testament to how well he was respected within coaching circles. So once the wheels came off for Mike Ruddock, there seemed like no better option to bring together what was a fractured but highly talented bunch of players. He was given a 2-year contract that would take him up to the up-and-coming Rugby World Cup, and was given a clear goal of building a squad and getting the boys ready to perform at rugby's biggest crescendo. His first chance to impose his philosophy on the Welsh squad was a 2-match tour away to Argentina.
Argentina were a strong side at the time, but not the powerhouse of world rugby that they are now, especially on the international levels, so this was always going to be a tough task in their own backyard for a young Welsh squad.
Jenkins was forced to rest a few players that had been away on the Lions tour the summer before, but still named a pretty strong squad. The first game of this series was a significant one, as it was played in Patagonia, which for anyone who didn't know was set up as a colony by a bunch of Welsh settlers back in the 1800s, and in some parts they still speak Welsh today, which is pretty cool. Jenkins named an inexperienced side with young Ian Evans and Alun Jones winning their first caps.
Do my best. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to have a good grounding, good first game, and take it from there really.
And even though the young side give a spirited display, they were just edged out by the senior Argentinians. The second test was a lot different though, as pretty much the same squad were comfortably dismantled 45-27 by the Pumas.
This wasn't an ideal start for Jenkins, but there was some flashes of some really good stuff in those games, and he did hand out quite a few first caps to, of course, the aforementioned 2 second rows, but the likes of James Hook and Richard Hibbard, all players that would have a long career for Wales and even get into the British Lions, some of them.
The biggest snag for Jenkins personally was he actually somehow lost his passport, delaying him getting home after this tour. And in fact, this type of luck was kind of a foreshadowing of the luck that he would have over his tenure. So after a rocky start, it was important to get some results in the next autumn fixtures. Up first was Australia, and looking at this team sheet now, the Australian selectors must have had a few cans of Fosters before they named this squad. They had Matt Giteau at 9, Matt Rogers at 10, Larkham at 12 and Takiri at 13. Not very respectful for their Welsh counterparts. In any case, this was a thriller, back and forth, and ended up going down to a late James Hook penalty to draw Wales level, with the game finishing 29-all. Not a bad result considering the squad Australia had back in 2006. They then followed this up with wins over Canada and the Pacific Islanders. And just a side note, I'd love to see them start the Pacific Islanders team back up again. That would be awesome given the players they could pick from. Anyway, they rounded off this autumn series by hosting the famous All Blacks team of the mid-2000s. But here is where Gareth's weird bad juju would strike once again.
So basically, what happened was, both teams sung their national anthems, and then as the fans were waiting in anticipation to witness the haka, both teams just went to their own side of the pitch. The game kicked off and everyone was just looking around thinking, what just happened? What happened there?
A few minutes into the game then appeared on the big screen a video of the All Blacks doing the haka in the change room before the game. It was very confusing and everyone was left a little bit scratching their heads. What had transpired was, in their infinite wisdom, the WRU had demanded that they would answer the haka with the Welsh national anthem. Now, any rugby fan that follows the game knows that the haka is the last challenge laid down by the New Zealanders before the game is kicked off. This is just a massive part of rugby in its heritage and is literally respected by everyone across the board. There are of course times when teams stand directly to challenge the haka, as Wales have done themselves, when they refuse to be the first ones to turn and leave.
Is just to calm things down after the haka. Wales hold their ground, New Zealand haven't moved. I don't know whether you can sense it, but the crowd are all part of this.
But that is down to the group of players on the pitch to stand and make a decision. The Union deciding not to back down from this stance is a sign of the sheer hubris of the people that were running the game in Wales.
On a personal note, I've only been lucky enough to get tickets to New Zealand once, and would you believe it, that is the game I went to. I was about 15 I think at the time, around that, and I just remember being super disappointed when I saw them doing the haka in the change rooms, and it's a shame.
So as ever, all the Union managed to do was make themselves look bad, and the only ones that lost out were the fans. This only served to motivate the New Zealanders, who then went out and put Wales to the sword, hammering them 45-10, and I think even that scoreline flatters Wales watching it back. Not a great ending to an autumn, but he had registered his first couple of wins pretty comfortably, and the Australia results was nothing to scoff at. So this gave him and his coaches something to build on. A good Six Nations run in 2007 could now put them in a really good position to perform in the World Cup that was happening that year. Jenkins' first Six Nations challenge was to welcome Ireland to the Millennium Stadium in the opener. In the first 60 seconds, Ireland took the lead, and from that point they never looked back and ran out comfortable winners, 19 points to 9. From there then the team headed to Murrayfield to face Scotland, but from the off just nothing was working. The team looked a little bit lost and off the pace, and ended up losing comfortably to what was a pretty average Scottish side, you have to say.
The next week was away at Italy, and to an incident that is still scarred my brain as a young Welsh fan.
Most of you watching know what happened at the end of this game. In fairness to Italy, they put on a classic gritty performance that so often kept them in games, but didn't often get them victories during the 2000 period. Right at the death though, they go ahead with what you have to say is an extremely ballsy but well executed try. To chip the ball over that close to the line with only 3 minutes left on the clock is a crazy gamble, but the execution from Pez and Bergamasco was superb. But that wasn't where the drama ended. With 2 minutes left on the clock, Wales put some good pressure and forced a poor exit from Italy. From that point on, a blunt attack earns Wales a penalty with a few seconds left on the clock. It's a more than kickable 3 points to salvage the blushes away at the Stadio Flaminio. But, of course, circumstances probably did not allow for a draw to be a positive result. So, James Hook asks referee Chris White, is there time to kick for the corner? White checks with his assistant, who says yes, 10 seconds.
Yeah, I can do it now. 10 seconds now, Jeff.
There are 10 seconds left, and James Hook said, have we got time to go for the line out? Chris White said yes.
Hook pings the ball into the corner, And as Wales walk up to take the line out, Chris White checks with his assistant again, who says time is up.
Time is up.
I have time.
Oh, and that's it! The whistle has gone, and that will cause consternation in Wales.
And after just telling them there was enough time to go for the corner, Chris White blows for full time, and the Italians get a famous win over the men of Wales. The Welsh players, and Gareth Thomas in particular, get right into the referee's face, and in fairness, I can totally understand that. I remember watching this down my local rugby club and being completely incensed as to the injustice of what just happened.
Chris White was a really experienced ref at the time and really should have had the courage of his convictions, because he said, you've got time. If the TMO comes over and says that's time, he should have let Wales carry on and have that line out. Whether Wales would have won is a different question, but the fact that it was snatched away from him in that manner is just cruel.
I mean, this was the type of luck that unfortunately constantly plagued Gareth's time in the top seat. But when you look at the team sheet from that day, there's so many top quality names you can pick out, and this still should have been a fairly regulation win against what at the time was still a very one-dimensional Italian team.
Going into the last game, they had to win to avoid the dreaded whitewash and wooden spoon, which at the time was something that was pretty rare in Welsh rugby, and just how times have changed, eh?
He also made the bold decision to drop Stephen Jones, someone who he had a long relationship with from their time at the Scarlets together, and start James Hook at outside half, who was the more informed player with the ability to spark something out of nothing, but had been playing almost exclusively out of position in the centre. And this ballsy decision really paid off, because Hook put on an absolute clinic. He was the man of the match, scoring a try and nailing his kicks from all over the shop.
It's kind of frustrating, like watching back and seeing Hook have this type of performance, and then just thinking forward as to how rarely he got a chance to play outside half, by Jenkins and Gatland after him, and they were just playing him in other positions.
In any case, this result saved the coach's blushes, winning the most important match of the year for every Welsh fan, and avoided that dreaded wooden spoon. And you can see the relief etched all over his face and body language after the final whistle had gone. Wales still finished a horrendous fifth though, and even though he'd beaten England in a convincing manner, the knives had started to come out for Jenkins, because people started to question whether his tactics and methods were a bit outdated for the modern game. The pressure was on, but the challenge did not get any easier, with the clock counting down to the World Cup. That summer, Jenkins took his Wales team on a two-match tour of Australia. He came under criticism again, this time from the Australian press, due to the fact that it had been deemed that he was bringing an under-strength Welsh squad because he had left 15 or 16 frontline Welsh players at home to rest. In my opinion, Jenkins rightly defended his decision, because looking at the squad, there was plenty of experience there, the likes of Gareth Thomas, Sonny Parker, Colin Travis, and there was loads of other players with 30 caps or more. And you also had the likes of a young Mike Phillips and James Hook playing as halfbacks. So I think it was a little bit of an unfair jab at the Welsh coach. The more interesting story is the one that a lot of players have recounted since retiring about Gareth's methods to get over jet lag.
Now this story is definitely true, because I've read it in multiple autobiographies of players that were around at that time. And what Gareth Jenkins' secret remedy to get over jet lag was, quote, jet lag rules. Now, what are jet lag rules, I hear you asking? Well, jet lag rules were you had to drink 10 pints, but you weren't allowed to spew. And apparently that got you over your jet lag.
Now, this is admittedly pretty funny, but I think this is a glaring example of why Gareth struggled so much. He was a superb coach and innovator during the early years of professionalism, but even though it was only a short time before, rugby was changing at such a rapid pace, and his old school methods were starting to get left behind. Say what you want about his methodology though, in the first test Wales ran out to an early 17-point lead, so maybe he had some idea right, you know. Australia clawed things back before James Hook nails an absolutely clutch drop goal with about 8 minutes left on the clock, with literally 90 seconds left in the match. Wales have a scrum around halfway, and all they need to do is keep the ball for a famous and rare win out in Australia. But what transpires? well, I'll just let you watch the clip.
So Cooper, he's given Australia some breathing space. Huxley gets the touch. No, he doesn't get the touch. It's inside the quarter. It was a good kick by Huxley. And there's a kick off the side. So Australia inside the last minute.
They need to stay in the centre of the field.
Oh, almost. Here it is. The winning try coming up. Stephen Hales. Heartbreak for Wales.
I don't want to throw shade at Gareth Cooper because he was a fantastic player, but I have no idea what he was thinking in that last minute. Maybe he was still suffering from the jet lags rules, but these kind of questionable decisions was what was happening far too often under Jenkins' leadership. The following game was a complete different story though. In quite frankly an awful game, Australia managed 31 points while keeping the visitors to 0. Absolutely shambolic.
Now, the pressure was really starting to come on Jenkins, and everyone was asking whether he was the right man for the job to take Wales forward. But he always had one stock answer, and that was, judge me on the World Cup.
So with rugby's biggest competition on the horizon, there were only 2 games left for Jenkins to get his squad right. The first was against Argentina, and Wales actually won a hard-fought victory, beating the visitors 27-20. And when you consider how well the Pumas went on to do in the following World Cup, this is a really good result. The final warm-up before the World Cup was England away. Whoever thought that this was going to be a good way to prepare for the World Cup really needs their head examined. Wales have historically struggled in Twickenham, and this was no different, as we got completely steamrolled by the men in white and headed into the World Cup with the players' last memory being a 62-5 romping, which was actually a record defeat for Wales at Twickenham. Jenkins added even more fuel to the fire, protesting that the scoreboard flattered England, saying something along the lines of, even though they scored 8 tries, they only made 3 line breaks. I mean, read the room, mate. The pressure was palpable by now, and Jenkins even admitted he was starting to feel it. In the year leading up to the World Cup, the BBC cameras had been following around the Welsh team, and just before the World Cup started, they released this documentary. It was called Gareth Jenkins Into the Fire, and on it, he basically admitted he was worried about his job. He said, quote, "Halfway through the Six Nations, there was times when I was thinking, well, I wonder, if the Welsh Rugby Union felt I wasn't performing and I wasn't successful, they could easily have ended my contract." End quote. It's a disheartening admission from a man who was clearly feeling that his life's reputation as a coach was really on the line. He also says, quote, "What would really kill me, what would really knock me back, was if I wasn't given an opportunity for longer than 2 years." End quote. And reading that back, knowing what we know now, is just sad, to be honest. But judge me on the World Cup though, that's what he kept saying. And here we were. No more preparations, no more talk. Now was time to deliver. The group Wales found themselves in consisted of Australia, Japan, Canada and Fiji. First up, Canada. Canada actually started really well and were in the league for a little bit before the superior Welsh firepower kicked in and the boys in red got the campaign off to a good start. 1 down, 3 to go. The next match was against the familiar Aussies. Familiar, but no better than Wales had feared in any of the other matches they'd played Australia recently. A brave second half effort in which the boys refused to go away, but Australia had too much composure and did enough to win 32-20. Not ideal, but not unexpected, and it wouldn't matter as long as Wales won the last 2 group matches. Next, Japan in the Millennium Stadium. This was actually a fun one, a decisive showing against a lower tier opponent, but you can only play what's in front of you, and Wales put the cherry and blossoms to the sword, winning comfortably 72-18. But this game is quite oftenly remembered for this fantastic Japanese try.
Nation for Wales at that position. Robbins gets the chance to get it away. Beautiful hands. Now there are men cleared on the far side. Japan are going to score.
Brilliant, 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 brilliant.
Anyway, 3 down, 1 to go. Wales would head to Nantes to face Fiji as heavy favourites. Fiji had always been an exciting team, but when you look at this Welsh team sheet, you should simply have too much for them.
I remember watching this game at home, and as a Welsh fan, it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Instead of trying to strangle the Fijians with his superior pack, Wales decided to meet them in a game of sevens and all hell broke loose. I vividly remember Delisau being virtually unplayable in the back line, and by half an hour Wales were 25 points to 3 down, and we were staring down the barrel of being put out of the World Cup again. By the time Wales got to the second half, we began to actually start using the set-piece dominance and getting a pushover try, and finally started to create some space and let wizard Shane Williams do his magic. And I love Nicky Little's little dive here as class. Understanding what was at stake, the players did really respond to the adversity, getting another well-worked try for Gareth Thomas, and then when Martin Williams intercepted Nicky Little and took it to the house with just 5 minutes left on the clock, Welsh fans breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, geez, we got away with that one. Fiji, though, had not agreed to that script, and basically kinged on the other side and broke down a shattered and disjointed Welsh defence to score a decisive try to win the fixture 38-34, putting Wales out of the World Cup.
Now, this was not Fiji of the modern day, and Wales were expected to beat the Pacific nation, but at the time, it is not hyperbolic to say this is probably one of the biggest upsets in World Cup history.
The celebrations on the pitch from the Fijians were amazing, and the juxtaposition with the Welsh players, who are all broken and probably had God knows what running through their heads, is quite fast. The one guy who I would have paid for a penny for his thoughts, though, would have been Gareth Jenkins. At the full-time whistle, we were thinking, what were they thinking trying to play that type of game against Fiji, who were the absolute 7 specialists of rugby? And it's not just him to blame. Nigel Davis was his second in command and in charge of the attack. He must have known, like everyone else did, that the way to beat Fiji was set-piece dominance and grind them down.
The big part for me, though, was the players. When you look through that team sheet on that day, there were so many quality players and so many players who would have literally been involved in a Grand Slam just a couple of months later.
I found this clip from Tom Shanklin on the Scrum 5 warm-up talking about what happened that day.
You know, we probably didn't prepare for it as well as we should. Underestimated them, definitely. And obviously, it was Gareth Thomas's 100th cap for Wales, which was a big occasion for him. First player ever to do it. You know, he was the captain as well. He was our leader. And these boots were made for him. And they were white and red, and they had Alfie 100 written on the tongues, and he took the studs out and wore them around the hotel. When you come in from the warm-up, you know, you put your shirt on and you start to feel a little bit bigger, and the realisation sets in that you've got a test match coming up, and then you start to listen to your leaders, and you got Stephen Jones talking about what the first kickoff's going to be, Alan Wynne, line out.
Nugget must have been saying.
Yeah, Nug about the breakdown, and then we're all in a huddle, and Gareth Thomas, sort of the captain's looking around. He's like, yeah. And we're all sort of engaging. And he goes, boys, I know what you're thinking. And he just lifts his leg up like that and goes, lush, like that with his boots. And I've gone completely like, I'm the worst. I've looked across, Dwayne Peel's gone. And I just couldn't believe it. And he tries to sort of bring it back with some serious motivation, but we're gone, absolutely gone. And then anyway, we go out, we lose the game.
Now, I don't want to judge too harshly here, because maybe Alfie is just trying to bring a little bit of levity to take away the pressure from the players, but I guarantee that if they were playing South Africa or England in that game, that wouldn't have been how the team talk finished. Anyway, the fallout, as you can imagine, was immediate and intense. And when I say immediate, I mean immediate.
Even when the players were still on the pitch and there was fans in the stadium, the brain trust of the WRU thought the best place to have this mothers' meeting would be on the centre of the pitch in front of everyone as they decided how they were going to approach this situation.
When he was asked about this fact later, David Pickering, not to be confused with Ronnie, said that in all of the chaos, that was the best place where they could make sure that no one was eavesdropping on what they were saying. Yeah, okay, mate. By the time the coach and the captain were facing the press, the Brains Trust had already called an emergency impromptu board meeting in one of the rooms in the stadium. Before Jenkins had had time to get up to the bar and have a stiff drink, it was already pretty much unanimously decided that he needed to go. The pictures of him getting fired in the car park before the team travelled home are probably the clip most synonymous with his tenure in charge. Apparently they had actually fired him shortly before in the team hotel, and briefed the players about it, but let's not let the truth get in the way of a good story. The whole debacle was ultimately what would bring in the Gatland era, and we all know what happened there. So looking back, you have to say the Union actually got this one right, but it doesn't make it any less brutal for a man who spent his whole life in Welsh rugby, and as a Welshman, the only thing he wanted was to bring success to his national team. He did float around a couple of other jobs, ultimately returning to the Scarlets as head of regional development, but never really coached again, because in my opinion, I just think the wound of being the national coach never quite healed. I feel the best way to end this video is by taking an extract from the great Adam Jones's autobiography. He speaks about returning to the Vale, and Gareth asked to get off the bus before it got to the front of the hotel so he could get off and walk around the service entrance, avoiding the mob of the press waiting for him at the front doors of the hotel. Jones says, quote, "Gareth stood up with his bag of duty-free in one hand and a couple of Toblerones and a bottle of whiskey in the other. He bowed us farewell, no speech, just a brief thanks, and he was gone. He walked up the lane on his own, wheeling his suitcase and clutching his plastic bag. It was a scene dripping with melancholy. He looked smaller, less commanding, like the whole thing had robbed him of his vitality." Thanks for watching.